Oh, one of the earliest ones though. Like I remember like when I got started with Matter of Fact, I was picking out like the crappiest of fonts. Like fonts now, like, oh my gosh. But like even like Papyrus, I would try out one time and like, geez Louise, what was I thinking?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. I'd like to acknowledge Vandercook College of Music for sponsoring this episode. With a world-class faculty, a location just minutes from downtown Chicago, and an intensive summers-only master's program, it's no wonder Vandercook College of Music has graduates teaching music in all 50 states, 21 countries, and 6 continents. Make next summer your most inspiring summer yet by pursuing a master's in music education at Vandercook College of Music. And for the next generation of music educators, Vandercook offers an exceptional, comprehensive 4-year Bachelor of Music Education program. Vandercook admissions information is available at www.vandercook.edu. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time, and I hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know 1 or 2 people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now, on to my next guest, John Bogenschutz. Hi, John.
Hey, how you doing, Mark?
Great. So, John, I'm really happy to have you join me this morning. We've had a little bit of each had to cancel once on our interview, and so it's great to finally catch up with you.
Yeah, definitely. And I almost had to cancel again because of a dishwasher situation, but we're good.
All right. Well, I'm glad we're going to get this done then. So, John,
Yeah.
Can you spend a few minutes and tell the listeners about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. I draw Tone Deaf Comics. You can find that at tonedeafcomics.com. And
You do tone deaf comics now, but you didn't start out that way. You were a music major?
correct. Yeah, I went to Northern Kentucky University for music ed and got my degree there, and then graduated in the fall of either 2000 or 2001, and then was fortunate to get a job at Adair County under Tim Allen in that January. Like he had a spot open up, and where I was student teaching at, Doug Neal, he would come around to schools and he told us about the opening. So I was pretty lucky to get that job, and I stayed there for a year and a half. So I learned a lot and taught middle school and high school under him.
So, John, can you tell everyone how you got your start in music, what your instrument is, and sort of how you came to play?
Yeah, definitely. I started playing trumpet because at the end of 6th grade, my friend Lorenzo Bethel and I, we were sitting out, filling out our classes together, and we hung out a lot. And we both had an extra opening, and we're like, well, you want to take band? And we're like, sure, let's take band. You're like, neither, or yeah, I should say, I didn't have any musical background. His mom actually taught elementary music at the elementary school we went to together. But yeah, so that school worked a little bit different than I think most schools, where in 6th grade, there were 7 special or elective classes, and you rotate between them like every 6 weeks, or there were six of them that you would take. And I ended up on the cycle where band was not that option. So I think he took it, but I was not in there. So when we signed up, we signed up together just, because we had that extra opening. We thought it would be fun. And then we went to go pick our instrument. And I remember loving the cartoon Dennis the Menace at the time and the theme song. And it had this great trumpet solo during the song. I was like, that's what I want to play. Got my instrument, and then found out that the instrument was actually a saxophone in the theme song. So my tone quality was really good that first year because I was trying to emulate a saxophone sound.
Awesome. And so, John, do you have, obviously you went on to become a music major. So do you have any stories of teachers in those early years that sort of inspired you to that kind of decision?
Yeah, my high school band director was always very passionate about what he did, and and teaching. And I remember like every marching band show he would write himself. So I'm sitting there like, man, he does everything. He still plays, he teaches, he writes music. I'm like, this is what I want to do. And so he was a big inspiration for me wanting to become a band director.
Yeah. What do you remember from him? What do you remember that he did that maybe my listeners can pick up on and use for their students? Do you remember anything in particular?
I do remember we would cite, and I know this is nothing out of the ordinary now, but we would sight read a new piece. I want to say it felt like every day, but I know that's not possible. But we sight read a piece of music a lot. It was probably more like once a week, and like just to sight read and play. And I remember like when we would do that, just like discovering like this new music each time. Like, wow, that was pretty interesting. And then, like, in the back of my mind, like, I hope we actually go back and play that. And, like, I remember one time it was even oh, gosh, what's the name of the piece? It's Festive Overture by Shostakovich. And I sight read the fifth trumpet part during that. And I remember playing it, and my part was nothing like the other trumpet parts. It felt like I had a melody in there. I think the B melody. And none of the other trumpets were playing it, but I was with the woodwinds, it felt like. And I was like, man, like this is super interesting. And so I started to pay attention to the orchestrations and everything and the pieces. Like when that hit, I was like, this is pretty neat. Like I'm not playing with them, but I'm playing with other parts of the band. And so just him allowing us to sight read a lot, or getting us to sight read. And I know he was doing it for a reason, but I was like, okay, I'm really liking what we're playing here. I like or instrumentation that's going on. So that opened up me to wanting to write music, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. And so tell me about that next step. You went to college. Were you a composition major or a trumpet major or education?
No, it was a music major. I never took any composition classes. It's just something I did on the side, and I probably should have. But yeah, I just wrote music on the side and love doing it. I just tinker around on my computer and get MIDI recordings of it and everything. And then when I started teaching, like I remember coming home every day and every night, just like, I don't want anything else to do with music. So I kind of stopped writing during that year and a half, and I really missed it. So after that year and a half, I left teaching to focus on writing music. So and then I did that for 10 years, I think. Yeah, it was mainly marching band arrangements, but even then, I was like, I still want to write like the band compositions, but kind of the same thing transpired where I was writing marching band music, and then I was not burnt out, but I didn't want to write any of the band compositions then because I was done for the day. So kind of the same thing happened there, but I was at least writing music, and I was really liking it.
So John, let me ask you, we'll kind of take two different directions. We're going to talk about the comics in a few minutes, but I want to ask you about one of the things I don't ever claim to know much about the marching arts. I did college marching band for my music ed degree, but that was about it. And I never had to teach marching band. The high school that I taught at was a private school when I first got out of college, and they didn't march. Okay. And so can you talk to me about the impact marching band had on you and the writing you were doing for that genre?
Yeah, I think for me, I know marching band's not for everybody, but I think what I got out of it was another way for me to fall in love with music. And so like when we would play music, the music we play in marching band, I started to look into that like on the side. Like I remember like our first show was like the Eagles music and then Billy Joel. So I just started listening to all that music, but then listening to other bands, they're playing like classical music. And then like I started listening to drum corps. And so I was like, I'm going to check that piece out. So I would continually be checking out pieces of music, classical music, after hearing a drum corps play it. And so I think for me, it opened up a wealth of classical music, just listening to a lot of it. And I just started like buying a whole bunch of CDs at that time. And just like my collection grew a lot man, I want to say like the collection was up to like 1,000 or something before I sold it. But it was, it mainly the marching band thing for me opened up like a wealth of repertoire to listen to.
And what were you doing? Mostly arranging or original compositions?
It was mainly arranging, but I was doing original compositions as well, and I loved doing those original compositions more than anything.
Sure. Are they still available?
They are not. I want to say it was about 5 years ago. I took down my music website. Just I didn't want to run two websites, and I could probably add it on to the one I have now, but I don't sell them anymore. The big reason is I don't have good like recordings of them. They're MIDI recordings, and a lot of them don't have the percussion with them. So it's like, I understand why people don't want to dig into that if there's no percussion stuff.
What is that like? What was that like when you were writing for marching band? What was your process like for doing that kind of thing?
I know for me, I would have to wake up. So this was before I was married. I would wake up at 7 a.m. every morning, even though I didn't have to. But I woke up at 7. I wanted to write for at least a half hour to 45 minutes and then eat breakfast. Because if I did not do that, I was not writing for the day. Like if I did not get that kickstart, I was not writing until about noon or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, or sometimes not even that day. But a lot of it was the more intricate details is I would actually, like if I was working on a marching band show, I would write down themes. I would fiddle around with them. I wouldn't do anything on the computer yet. I'd just be at my keyboard. I'd have a sheet of manuscript paper, and I would sometimes not even manuscript paper, just a blank sheet of paper, and I would just like write rhythms down. I would write the rhythms, maybe write like the notes above them, just so that whole process didn't get in my way of just fiddling around the keyboard, putting stuff on a paper. And I would come up with like different chord structures. I would come up with different chord rhythms, just the rhythms of a piece, just trying to find little motifs to use, some melodies to use, break those melodies down. And then from there, I would actually just write down the structure of the piece before I even did anything on the computer, before I did anything on like Sibelius or Finale. And I was using Sibelius most of the time for that.
Sure. I find your comment about starting right in the morning so that you don't procrastinate interesting. Do you know the book by Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art?
No.
Well, Stephen Pressfield, it was an author of historical fiction, and he wrote a book about productivity called The War of Art. And he talks about his procrastination. He calls it resistance. And his theory is that, and I think it's pretty true, is that anything that makes you better offers resistance. And so he militarizes the whole thing because he writes, historical fiction. And he's like, I got to lace my boots up, and the first thing I have to do is get to work because I've got to fight back the resistance. Just thought that was interesting. Yeah, it's a fascinating book.
Yeah, I wish I still did it.
So, John, when did you start drawing? When was that?
I started drawing, let's see here. It was Tone Deaf came out in 2010. I started drawing in 2008 because I did a single panel comic called Matter of Fact for 2 years that released 3 times a week. And I started that because I was like, you know what? I really I feel like I have some ideas I want to put down and make into comic form. I looked into stand-up comedy at one point, and I did it a couple times, and I enjoyed it while I was on stage. But I remember like that couple times I did it, I like total anxiety was setting in, like leading all the way up to that. And I know myself, I was like, I could never get used to that. Cause even when I played trumpet in college and had a performance, even just if it was with the band, I would have so much anxiety. So like, I'm like, you know what? That's not for me. What's another way that I can do these ideas? So I decided to do a single panel comic. But I was like, I don't know how to draw. So I put out, I can't even remember where I put it out on the internet, but I put it out like, hey, I'm interested in an artist to draw this comic for me. And I got a few replies, and like there were a couple where the art was fantastic. I'm like, geez, old Pete, if I could get this guy like on the same schedule as me. And he did a few of them, he drew 3 of them. And then after that, I realized, okay, he's not going to be able to do the same schedule as what I want. And then I tried to find another person, kind of the same dilemma. So it got to a point after like a couple months, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to draw these on my own. And so I drew them. And then I'm happy I did, even though they look terrible. Like what you see at the beginning of Tone Deaf is 100 times better than what this looked like. And that beginning of Tone Deaf looks horrible. But I'm glad I did it, because it gave me a little bit more creative control, and I didn't have to. Knowing myself, I was going to get frustrated if I had to wait for someone to get stuff in, and just rely on somebody to do that.
So we need to talk about tone deaf comics because they're really smart, and I have lots of questions about how you do it. But I want to ask you, because as I respond to your story and I listen to your story, I have to ask, how is stand-up comedy like being a band director?
That's a good question. I only did it 2 times, so I'm like, man, I think the only I was about to say preparation. But even then, I think just the aspect of preparation is what's in common. But after that, though, like stand-up comedy, you, for the most part, do have a written routine. But as a band director, I think being a band director is more like improvising. You're kind of given the parameters. You still have to prepare. I don't know. Maybe I've never been asked this question, so I'm trying to think. Maybe it's like a combination of improv and stand-up comedy, because in one aspect, you do have a preparation to take for stand-up, and like, hey, I'm going to hit this point and this point and this point. But at some point, as a band director, you're going to get that kid who throws a clarinet at you, so you have to improvise. So I think it's probably a little bit of a combination of both. Because you have to be able to be on your feet and be ready for anything that comes at you.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because I see them as being really similar, comedians and teachers.
Yeah, there's definitely especially with like playing music, you have to have that timing down, and just like with the stand-up comic, they have to have that perfect beat and execution of the joke.
So, John, let's talk about tone deaf. I'm looking through the early archives here. You kind of encouraged me to do that. And so I'm looking at the typeface. Is that a font, or is that your calligraphy?
No, that's a font.
It's a great font.
Handwriting is terrible. So like my older brother has a great comic font, like almost like a Garfield writing font. And if he had the time, I'd be like, can you just letter this for me? But yeah, no, my handwriting's atrocious. So I had to go out and find a font that would fit that.
Yeah, the font is terrific, and I look at your early comics. You can see sort of your development, though. You sort of see like where you came from.
Yeah, the characters you don't see there, in matter of fact, had like this big bulbous heads and tiny bodies, and then at one point I changed it to what you see there on Tone Deaf, where they turned into, I want to say, square heads, or they have the oval head and square bodies and square feet. And I can't remember what the hands looked like.
So do you have an inspiration, a comic inspiration? I'm trying to think of what they look like, because they look like the comics I grew up with in the newspaper, the Sunday Funnies.
I like the current, like what they look like now, and even back then, I don't have anything that I was trying to emulate. I know a lot of people say what they look like now reminds them of The Simpsons, and until they said that, I was like, oh, I can see that with the eyes, more so the eyes, but I don't think anything else there. But I do remember there was a comic artist named Chris Straub, and he I can't remember exactly which comic it was that he drew, because he draws so many, and like kind of does one for a couple of years and then pushes it off and then does another one. But he strips his characters down to the barest emotional elements in the face, where there's no nose and no ears. And for a period of time, I'm like, why does he not do that? I was like, oh, it's because you can't emote anything with those two elements. Like there's nothing there. So I think the reason is he didn't want the nose or ears to get in the way. And I was trying to think of the same thing to do with my characters, but I was like, I can't really rip that off. Like that's such a genius element. So I think that inspired me. Like, what can I do differently with my characters? And I think that the one thing I did, and it's nothing big, but my characters, when they first came out, when I redesigned them out of the box bodies, was Ed Harmon, the band director. His body shape was the shape of a banana, and Tom Talbot, his shape was the shape of a pear, and then Dr. Dapperton was the shape of a blueberry. And that's about it.
Yeah, I guess I don't know why I'm stuck on like the origins of the comics. They just look so classic to me.
Oh, thanks.
So, John, you have posters and you have all these comics, and I mentioned earlier that they're very smart. You have some pretty highbrow music humor in some of these, some things that are pretty deep in the music history anecdote list, that the average high school student might not get right away.
Yeah.
And so I think that's great because you're kind of opening up minds through your comics. You're kind of like educating through your comics.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. I know like some of them, like the Mahler Symphony one, I always bring up this example because people are always like, how'd you come up with that one? And I just know Mahler. Like, that's why I'm not writing a comic about Bruckner. But like, because I don't really care about Bruckner, but I like Mahler. So everybody asks me about that comic. How did you come up with that one? And like, it's because I had a conversation with my younger brother who was going to a symphony orchestra, or he came back from a concert. He was like, I heard a Mahler piece. And I was like, which one was it? And he couldn't tell me. I was like, did it start with horns at the beginning? He's like, no. I'm like, okay, check that one off the list. And so that just came by through a conversation with my younger brother, just checking off, see which symphony he heard. And I want to believe it was the first. So he still couldn't tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I notice you have a couple things that you like to pick on. Trumpet players seem to get picked on a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's just because I play trumpet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw it. And I did it as well. So I'm like, I think this is true for the most part. Don't want to really lump everybody into one thing, but
Yeah, well, I'm a trumpet player also, and we definitely live up to the reputation sometimes. Even I play, like I say this a lot on the show, I play in a community band every Tuesday night.
Oh, nice.
And I still can't get that trumpet player out of me. You know what I mean? I still can't not be that guy. I mean, I try. I mean, I'm respectful, but it's pretty funny how it just never goes away.
Right. So you play every Tuesday?
Every Tuesday night.
Band?
Yep.
Nice.
Yep, I do. Yeah. So every now and then I'll write a piece for them and play, and it's just a nice little sort of hobby within music.
Awesome.
Yeah. We'll talk about work-life balance a bit later, but that's mine. So how about what other topics do you touch on in the Tone Deaf? I noticed that you have lots of current event stuff, especially with DCI. And so how do you stay current with all of that? How are you plugged into that? I used to do a lot more drum corps stuff. But there was always a balance there. Like, I know not everyone in my audience liked the DCI comics. I'm like, okay, I have to make sure I don't go overboard with this stuff. And what kind of helps with that, and it's so weird, I would think it would be the opposite, is that those usually aren't as well received as the other ones. So I'm like, there were ones that I did earlier on where it would basically be like, okay, this one's going to be about Cavaliers, and there were like 10 jokes in there, but it would take forever to write that comic because there were 10 jokes in that comic, even though it was just one drawing of
somebody in a Cavalier uniform. So it's like, okay, I don't know if like what I put into that comic is really worth what's coming out of it. So I started, I definitely stopped those where it would be like the joke, release schedule, a few likes. I'm like, okay, all right, message received. And then, so I just do it like right now, the way it's going with Tone Deaf because of my schedule, where I don't have as much time to write and draw comics and more so the writing of the comics. I am more picky about what I'm doing. So if a subject jumps out to me, I'll still put it in I have an Evernote account. I'll put it in the Evernotes and I'll mark it next, or I'll tag it next. So I know I can click on that and see, okay, this is one that I did want to draw pretty soon. But yeah, I'll do that, and then I'll probably draw it right away. But there's so many things in there that I'm like, okay, next, and then I never draw. Like there's ones that I'm looking at lately. I'm like, oh, this was from 8 years ago, and I never drew this one. And I remember thinking it would be a good idea. And even now, I'm like, okay, I still didn't draw it. Like even after looking at it, so I'm like, I just don't. It comes down to that I don't have time to do everything. So the drum corps ones have kind of taken a hit, except for like 1 or 2 a year.
Sure. Did you find you were getting pushback because are people sensitive about that?
No, it wasn't that. It wasn't anybody was pushing back because of the subject matter or I was being offensive about anything. It was just they like if I put out a comic on Monday that was just a regular Tone Deaf comic, it might get like 500 likes. And then the one on Wednesday, which was a drum corps one, because I tried to make sure it was balanced, it would be like 10 likes. I'm like,
right,
okay.
Right. Maybe you niche down too much. Your audience is too small for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
Right.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm fascinated by how you get these ideas. I know you use Evernote, and I use that also for composing and for just pretty much everything I do.
How do you use it for composing?
I sing melodies. Like if I'm in the car and I get a melody in my head, or if I'm doing something else and I have something that jumps out to me, I'll sing it into Evernote and I'll just kind of archive it. I'll try to put a little note. I'll probably say like good slow idea, beginning band, something to kind of trigger it. But I've got literally hundreds that I've never gone back. I probably need to go through and listen to them.
Well, that's I do that too with the voice memo on my iPhone. And I actually just bought a new keyboard and I've started doing that. So I didn't know Evernote would do the voice recording thing too.
As I look through your ideas, it's really fascinating. Is this all you, or do people every now and then get in touch with you and say, "Hey, John, you should do something about band parents running the band program"? I'm looking about that's the one I'm looking at right now.
All right. So that's a 2-part question. So the people do contact me. And most of the time, I would be appreciative of the idea, and I would put it in Evernote. And if I did use the idea, I would change it around a little bit, of course. But I think there's only been a couple times where when someone would send me an idea, I would like immediately like, holy mackerel! Like I would ask them like, can I use this? And like keep it as is because I thought it was so perfect. And I'm not saying like people are giving me bad ideas. I honestly right now, I don't get a lot of ideas anymore from people. I think one, because they know that I'm not going to use them. But the band parent one is because I do have a freshman now who's been in the marching band for 2 years. So I'm seeing that totally opposite side of the spectrum now where, I've been there as a band director. I've been there as a spectator. And now I'm there as a band parent, and it's tough. Like I knew the band parents did a lot, and I'm not one of those that actually does a lot. My wife does a heck of a lot more. I'm mainly I don't do as much because we have 2 younger kids who I kind of have to watch during show days and stuff. But they do so much for the band program and every band parent for band program. So I'm like, whew, geez Louise, like there's a lot going on behind the scenes that a lot of people don't see, and even other band parents current band parents that they're not seeing. But that's where those band parent comics are coming from. And some of those are coming from what my wife is telling me as well, what's going on. And she's like, don't draw this into a comic. I'm like, I think I'm going to draw this into a comic, honey.
Yeah. I loved my band parents when I was a high school teacher, and I also hated them at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yes.
They did way more great things than they did bad, but the couple times that it was bad, it was really bad.
Yeah. And I used to have comics where I would rag on the band parents a lot. And I think the fair shake of all this is that it's really one or two band parents that are doing this. And it's just like, all right, just like, I know that you're passionate about this, but I think the approach is going very inappropriate or the wrong way around this.
I think, yeah, and I think there are always exceptions. Of course, we know about legal things that people get into, but I think for the most part, most band parents have their best interest of their student in mind. So.
Right. And I mean, I totally see it. Like, that's their kid and they want the best for them. But just like in every aspect of life, we're not seeing the full picture, or they're not seeing the full picture of what's going on and what actually has to happen.
So tell me about sort of the growth of the company from the early days. I know you mentioned that you started drawing in 2008, but you founded Tone Deaf in 2010?
Yeah, and that's when I was still doing music composition and marching band arrangements at the time. And I was like, what can I do to like get people to my website? And when I was drawing Matter of Fact, I already had a very select few music comics themselves, and not classical comics, but I was like, what if I did a couple of like classical comics that were single panels just as a promotion and get people to my website. So that's how it started, is that I did it once a week, I believe. I drew a comic, put it on the website, so it got people there to the website. And then it started to get to the point where I was like, okay, well, this is kind of taking over. Because I think I started drawing more because I was enjoying it and people were liking it and responding to it. So I started drawing the comics more, and it kind of worked out at the perfect time. Because again, I think I mentioned before, like I was not towards the end, but like I didn't have time to do my music composition stuff, and I was doing the music arranging mainly. And I felt like I was starting to get burnt out on that just a little bit. So I was like, okay, so that's tapering down while at the same time the comic stuff is taken off at the right time. And so they kind of just crossed over at the exact moments to where like I felt really comfortable starting to wean off the music arranging as a livelihood and let Tone Deaf take over for that. So I felt very fortunate in that aspect where there wasn't really a lull in the money coming in. So,
last question on Tone Deaf. I know you have some recurring characters that revisit the comic from time to time.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about the relationship with some of the people and sort of the reactions from composers and conductors who make appearances in your strip?
Yeah, so I know, like, and I haven't used them in a long time, but I've been thinking more about doing them again. Where, like, you mentioned Tyler Grant. And he and I will chat every now and then, like every year or something. At Midwest, we'll see each other.
Yeah, sure.
And then John Mackey was in a few, and I can't remember the last time I put him in there. But I remember, like, when I put him in, I knew his stature height-wise. I was like, oh, God, I hope he doesn't get mad about this, because I kind of made him look like a little kid. But his one comment was like, that's not me. I have pointy shoes. So I'm like, point taken. So,
yeah. That's
and then
great.
I did Frank Ticelli as well. I think there are a couple, and Stephen Bryant as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
I saw Dr. Tim in one.
Yeah. He was in one this past year that I finally drew him for the first time. But Frank Ticelli, they were all very good natured about it. And I think there was one comic where John Mackey was piggyback writing Frank Ticelli throughout the convention hall, or something like that. I can't remember. And so in that year, John Mackey came over to introduce himself to me at my booth at Midwest. So I said, "Hey, do you want to do a piggyback ride for a picture?" And he's like, "No." I'm like, "Oh, I respect that."
So that's really funny. And so did you contact them at first before you did it, or did you just draw them?
I don't think I did contact them beforehand.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with a little bit of humor. There's, so long as it's not personal.
Right. And I was fully prepared if they contacted me and said, "Hey, can you stop or take that down?" I was just going to take it down.
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, Robert W. Smith has been on your strip too, right?
Yeah, and I think I think he was one of those comics where it was like basically a Robert W. Smith fact comic. I can't think of really what it was, but it was one of those where it had like 10 to 12 jokes. And I'm like, whew, just trying to write my way through that one. And the problem with those is that like I'll write down ideas and then I'll have to construct a joke for each one and make sure that they hit. And one and two, that they actually make sense.
And how about the posters? When did that start?
That started pretty early on. I can't remember which one was the first poster, but I do know it started. I know I did tone deaf for, it felt like a year before I started doing any merchandise. I could be wrong about that. It could have been towards the end of that first year, or maybe like 3/4 of the way in. But yeah, I was just like, you know what? Like, people are responding well to this. Let me go and, make a poster. And whatever that first poster was, I can't remember. I don't think it was the Band Room Rules, but, it sold really well. And then I made another one and it sold. And then I made a third one. It didn't sell as well. And so I'm like, oh man, I thought this was guaranteed gold, so, and it wasn't. And I think that one was, it was something about how to know if you should be a band director or not. And it was kind of like one of those flow charts. And in my head, I'm like, this is great. And people did think it was funny, but something that got brought to my attention pretty quickly, like, okay, not everything is going to be successful as a poster. Like, because not everybody's going to want to hang this up, So then I had to really start to figure out, okay, this would be good as a poster, or like, I really like this one, but not everybody's going to want to hang it up.
So what's your best-selling poster?
That would be the periodic table of music notation.
Yeah, I figured that was. I'm excited to announce the Everything Band podcast has joined forces with several other music education-related podcasts to form the Music Teacher Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. All right, so let's do this. And so I know that the first question I'm going to ask you, you have some experience with because you were in the marching arts. And so this is where it most often comes under criticism. But where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
So I'm going to back up a little bit on this one. I marched to Madison Scouts, and at that time period, Scott Stewart was the director, and his viewpoint when I was there, and it's probably still his viewpoint, is that competition these aren't his words, but is not good for marching band or drum corps. And I see his point. I do think there needs to be, I think competition is good to a certain extent. And the only, like for drum corps, it's good because I think it attracts more members. Like if you're an individual drum corps and you score, and if you place in finals, you're going to get more members trying out for your corps. I think that's the trend. So I think in terms of that, if you are trying to score higher and place better for that reason, I think that's perfectly fine. But I think it comes into when it starts affecting the show designs and you're making clear cut decisions more so in the balance of scores. I'm like, man, that's where I have trouble with it. And so when I'm watching a marching band show and it's so clearly designed to be a check on a score sheet, I'm like, all right, well, that's clear as day what you're doing here. And I don't really like, that's when I stopped becoming a fan of like the show and everything. And I know for me, a period of time where I did not like drum corps, I want to say it was like around 2001 through '06. I felt like that's kind of what was going on. And I do like shows from those years, but like for the most part, I'm like, man, I don't listen to those years a lot. And I felt like it was getting too per the boxes on the sheet and became less entertaining for me and more, it was designed more for the judges.
John, I know you do the strip now and you do tone deaf more than anything, but how do you find a work-life balance, and how, and maybe we can extrapolate that to music teachers as well?
I have to build it into my schedule, and I used to be more so to where, I would be working more on like my music stuff and drawing and disregarding like my family life. And so I've had to switch that and just like try to find a way to make it work, because I do work a full-time job and I do tone deaf. And then, as I mentioned, like I have a wife and kids. And so it's just a matter of like, how do I fit this Tetris puzzle together to where there's not too many of one shape in here? And so it like I have switched priorities to where, of course, that full-time job, I have to do it. That for right now will not change. So then I structure around that. And so like the tone deaf stuff, instead of doing it when I'm here at home, I try and leave like maybe a little bit extra early for work. And if I get there without any traffic situations, I'll have time to draw a comic, or at least maybe I'll put the text on the page, I'll lay out the panels, and then on my lunch break, I'll draw the comic. So, and that's another reason why I can't really live stream those, because where I work, I can't record.
John, so from where you sit, what are the challenges facing music education and band, and how can we best meet them?
I think that's a good question for anybody else. I don't have that hands-on of an experience anymore with music education. Like for me, it really is the only thing I really do anymore is the band parent thing.
How about arts and society in general?
I think there's definitely, I think it's taking a back burner more than it should anymore. And I know that there's a whole balance of like budget stuff and everything there, but it is to wreck it. I think the challenge that we face is how do we get the people in charge of budget, or even like the lines up to that person or committee? How do we show them that what we're doing is important and making a difference? And so I think our challenge is not only one, of course, running a good band program, but able to come up with ways to convince and show how this all works and why it needs to be part of the school program still.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of your posters talk about that or express that concept.
Yeah, it's tough, and I don't know if anybody has the answer. Like we'll see. I don't know the answer to it.
There's no easy answers. The one thing I would definitely say is that all the arts teachers, all the specialists need to stick together.
Yeah, right. It can't turn into everybody for themselves.
Yeah, it can't be band versus choir or music versus theater, or everyone has to kind of pull together.
Right.
What advice would you give your 18-year-old self, perhaps standing across the dais at your graduation? What would you tell yourself?
To stop talking and listen to other people. Like I mentioned when I did when I was doing music composition arranging, I thought it was the coolest thing how I didn't have to take any classes and I could do this. But then I'm making so many mistakes along the way. And the same thing was with like in high school, I didn't take any trumpet lessons, and got to college, started taking trumpet lessons. I was like, I should have probably been taking trumpet lessons this whole time. Like, I think it's a matter of like recognizing, hey, other people are there to help you. Like, don't be self-centered on this, and seek out help, seek out instruction, seek out ways to get people to give you feedback, and like let them in to see what you're doing so they can help you with it. Because I was pretty stubborn about just trying to do it on my own. And I thought that was the dumbest thing in the world now.
Yeah, we often think we can do more when we're young.
Yeah.
I had a conversation. I can't remember if it was who I was talking to on this show about my first teaching job. You know, I was so young, and I got this offer of a job. I was unexpected to teach at an independent school, and I had to start a band program. And boy, I made so many mistakes. And when I go back and listen to my bands on those judging tapes from the late 90s, it's like, oof. How could I let that happen, you know? But we all grow up and we all mature, and it does get better no matter what we do.
Yeah. And it is recognizing, okay, that was a mistake. What could I have done differently? Like, let's move forward from here and not do that again. All
right, John. So you mentioned your love of Mahler, but I'm going to ask you, if you had a choice and you were conducting again, and I know that you're not, but if you were, what would be the final work for wind ensemble or orchestra or anything that you'd want to conduct or be a part of?
Well, I think that, like, it is one of my favorite Mahler symphonies. But, like, you can't deny the end of the Second Symphony by Mahler, The Resurrection. Like, that's just too, like, that would, if you're going out on top, that's the one to go with.
Yeah, there's no question.
No, like, you can't deny that. It's just too good.
All right, John, so this may live on the internet for a long time, but is there anything that you'd like to share or promote beyond Tone Deaf Comics?
Not really. Like, that's what I'm doing right now. So.
And you're usually at Midwest every year?
Yeah, I'm going to be there this year. I don't know when this is coming out, but I'll be there this year in 2018. Pretty close to the Hal Leonard booth. I'm right near the front this year.
Uh-huh.
And then I'll be at TMEA in 2019. So kind of this year as well.
Okay, Midwest and TMEA this year. Well, I'll definitely see you at Tone Deaf. I will definitely see you at Midwest, and excellent. This will be out before Midwest. I think another 2 weeks or so. I think we have a couple of guests in front of you, but not too long now. And so how can people get in touch with you?
If they go to tonedeafcomics.com, that's where the comics and merchandise and contact information is now. So I used to have 2 different websites, but I just combined it all into one a couple of years ago.
Sure. And so, John, I know that you resist compliments a little bit, but let me tell you that you do a wonderful thing for band directors. Having humor and having these kind of resources is really great for what we do, and I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
And thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.